Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, the US accuses Turkey of interfering after a vote to send in military support to Libya to back the internationally recognised government that's under siege there in Tripoli. Also, Algeria releases 76 anti-government protesters from prison. Many were held ahead of the unpopular presidential elections last month, and though free, say that they're angry that they were ever held in the first place. And we meet a 13-year-old Nigerian girl who's swinging for the stars. She's a golfing nut who says that she has a shot at competing like Tiger Woods in her favourite sport. But first, Turkey's parliament voted to send in troops to Libya to help the UN-backed government currently under siege in Tripoli. It's been under attack from a rival administration led by General Khalifa Haftar since last April. The government of national accord asked Ankara for military support. The conflict continues to escalate, and it's still not clear how big the potential deployment could be. Olivia Salazar-Winspear tells us more.
Bolstering Tripoli's military clout, Turkey has voted to send troops to Libya. Lawmakers in Ankara gave the bill the green light after Tripoli's beleaguered government of national accord asked for backup in the ongoing conflict with rival factions from the east of the country.
The total votes are 509, 325 in favour and 184 against.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan had already pledged his support to UN-backed Libyan Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj, describing the threat to his authority as a putsch supported by Arab countries and Europeans. Sarraj's forces have been under attack from fighters led by General Khalifa Haftar since April last year, vying for control of Tripoli. This vote gives Turkey a one-year mandate to dispatch troops to Libya, along with a maritime accord covering the eastern Mediterranean. Yet for Libya's rival administration, Ankara's move is stoking regional tensions.
He is obsessed with the idea of restoring the glory of the Ottoman Sultanate in order to control the Arab world and the whole world.
Thursday's vote has also been criticised by neighbouring Egypt, where officials called it a violation of international law. And the UN's Libya envoy has said the deals signed with Turkey represent an escalation of hostilities in Libya.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined by Anas El Goumati from the SADC Institute. Anas, thanks very much for speaking to us. Now, Egypt on Thursday made it very clear that it's none too pleased by Turkey's involvement in Libya. And from the US, Donald Trump warned against any foreign interference from Ankara in Libya. So do you think that is what this is? Turkey prompting the internationalization of the Libyan conflict by stepping in?
That's certainly wrenching it from its context. And I think if we look at the wider picture since April 4th, we can see that on Khalifa Haftar's side, that he's deployed Russian mercenaries to Tripoli's front lines because he doesn't have many Libyan soldiers to fight for him. That we heard about a Libyan air force that is being entirely run by an Emirati drone force from the east of the country, and that effectively they've rested on a French diplomatic veto at the European Union level and occasionally at the UN level to ensure that there are no condemnations, no criticism, and that arms embargo continues to be violated. So the idea that it's become, or now that today, in January 2020, 8 months after this conflict was sparked, that today that's international is wrenching it from its context and not giving it justice, because on April 4th, 2019, when Haftar launched his invasion, he did that in the presence of Antonio Guterres, the head of the UN Security Council, the head of the UN, in fact, who had only arrived into Tripoli that day to try to herald a new peace conference, a dialogue process, the beginning of something that would lead towards elections by the end of that year. And today we stand in this year talking about it being an international conflict 8 months after the fact. I think it's shameful to be thinking about it in those terms, I think.
But it still comes down to the fact that it is Turkey who has clearly decided to get involved. Why do you think it's done so?
Well, first it comes from the government of national accord that spent most of April and May in dismay, calling President Macron, asking whether or not he supported the government of national accord, a government that his own administration brought into reality some 3 years before, that they spent most of that month, in fact, going to the US going to Paris, going to Berlin, going to London, trying to muster some support from the international community. When that international support didn't come, they turned to Ankara, who have also tried to translate this meaningful kind of military cooperation, sending of troops, into something much, much broader, which is part of a maritime deal that for Turkey is immensely, immensely lucrative, given that the Eastern Mediterranean around Libya is a treasure chest, almost a treasure nest of around $3 trillion worth of natural gas that's under the sea, and that would have been, without the Government of National Accord's signature on this Turkish Memorandum of Understanding, it would have been exclusively exploited by Egypt, Greece, Israel, and Cyprus. But now that Turkey has been able to muster the Government of National Accord's support from Tripoli, it's been able to challenge that, and by challenging it, it disrupts any of those countries being able to exploit those treasures alone, and perhaps gives it a bargaining position in future negotiations down the line.
So we still don't know exactly what sending in the troops means, but broadly, how do you think that will affect the standoff currently being seen between the GNC and Haftar around Tripoli?
So it's basically almost a defensive measure. I mean, the Government of National Accord has called upon on Turkey to send its troops, given that only in the last couple of weeks there have been major incursions by Russian Wagner mercenaries that are on Tripoli's front lines and that are threatening to basically implode Tripoli in its most densely populated territories. And if that was the case, both the GNA and even Haftar would not be able to control downtown Tripoli, the most populated areas, but it would also see a rise in the migration crisis that we thought we'd got on with from 2015, but could be back on the agenda. So I think in that respect, I think it's a defensive measure. It doesn't seem like they're going to be deploying troops to eastern Libya, where Haftar controls the majority of the territory in that area. So I think it's about balancing it out, and hopefully this could lead to a ripening of both sides in equilibrium, and perhaps some peace talks in the very near future.
Thanks very much. Anas Al-Gumati from the SADC Institute there. Look now at some other news. Somali al-Shabaab rebels have claimed responsibility for the attack of a convoy of buses in Kenya, in which at least 3 people were killed. 3 buses and 2 vans were being escorted by police through Nyongoro in Lamu County when gunmen opened fire. Hundreds of mourners marched through Mogadishu on Thursday in memory of the 79 people who were killed in a truck bombing in the Somali capital last week. The attack was the deadliest the country suffered in 2 years. Al-Shabaab claimed that they were behind the bloodshed over the weekend. Many of the victims who died when the bomb went off at a busy checkpoint on Saturday were students. After months of difficult negotiations, Tunisia has unveiled a final proposed list for a government. The 28-member cabinet is mainly made up of independents. It was pulled together by Prime Minister Habib Jemli of the Ennahda party. It won legislative elections last October, but not enough to form a majority in parliament, and it's been struggling to negotiate political allegiances to come up with a list of ministers. Lawmakers now have to set a date to vote on the cabinet. And Algeria's new Prime Minister has also appointed a new government. Abdelaziz Gerad has kept the old foreign energy and interior ministers in place. It may be in a bid to maintain some continuity amongst recent upheaval. The appointments come amidst the country's biggest political crisis in decades. That followed the ousting of longtime leader Abdelaziz Bouteflika last April. President Abdelmajid Tebboune was sworn in as president just in December. And staying with Algeria, it released 76 anti-government protesters from prison on Thursday. Many are arrested ahead of the unpopular presidential elections last month. Some were acquitted after months of pre-trial detentions, but about 30 were convicted and served about 6-month sentences. Many of those released on Thursday are still angry that they were ever locked up in the first place.
Thank God we're out of jail. I was drinking milk and eating bread when I was arrested in September. I was arrested because I was demonstrating peacefully. I wanted things to change, so we went out and we rebelled for Algeria. I was in prison for 4 months with my brothers, and God got us out of prison, not this system.
Above all, this is a favor from God. But I also want to thank the Algerian people, the lawyers who didn't abandon us and our families. The Algerian people will continue to fight and do their utmost to restore freedom and independence.
I say to the Algerian people not to compromise on their principles for which we all came out on the 22nd of February last year. We must not give in.
And finally, we hear from a 13-year-old Nigerian girl who's swinging for the stars. She's a golfing nut who says that she wants to be her country's Tiger Woods. Nicolas Chemin tells us more.
When Ayine Essian was 5, she saw some boys playing golf and decided she wanted to do the same. Her father bought her some clubs. She's now 13 and has already won many tournaments.
These are the trophies I've won throughout my 8-year career playing golf. This is my first trophy that I won at the age of 5 at IBB Golf Club.
She currently holds the #1 ranking in Nigeria's junior circuit. Last year, she was the only teenager to take part in the Nigeria Ladies Golf Open Championship. She finished 10th out of 177 players.
She still has some room for growth. And I think, as I said, by the age of 15, she will be ripe, to take the golf world by storm.
But her life is not exclusively about sports. She already knows what she wants to study at university.
I will study artificial intelligence and robotics. I will combine my studies with playing in the university golf team. In the next 10 years, with a degree in my hand, I will play as a professional golfer.
She says one of her aims is to later help children from poor homes to get the chance to play her favourite sport. Her more immediate goal is to win Nigeria's first ever gold medal for golf at the 2022 Summer Youth Olympics.
Am I the only one feeling a bit inadequate after seeing that? Well, we wish her the very best of luck in the future. And that is, unfortunately, all we have time for on Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us, and do so again if you can. Take care.